Hello, Michelle Perda here, life and marriage coach for moms. Today we're going to be talking about how to shorten fights. So I took a poll on my Instagram stories. If you're not following me, follow me there, Michelle Perda Coaching. And I took a poll and asked people, on average, how long their fights lasted. And the options were minutes, hours, and days. And I want to know from you what your answer is, and I'm going to share with you what other people said. So today we're going to be talking about just how you can start to get more time back doing the things that you love instead of spending it arguing, which I'm sure none of you want to spend your time doing that because we're already at our max with time, I'm sure, as moms, right? Okay, so pop your answer in and hit pause if you haven't yet, and I'll let you know what people are saying. So most people answered that their fights lasted days. Can you believe that? Days. That sounds terrible. If this is you, I'm so glad you're watching. I'm so glad. Even if your answer is hours, I'm so glad you're watching because I want to take it to minutes for you, or at least have be a fraction of what's going on for you so that you can gradually work your way down to something more manageable, right? It's not that we want to avoid arguments because arguments are unavoidable. Arguments are actually a good sign in your marriage, actually, not frequent arguments, but having arguments, period, is essential because if you're not having arguments, that means that there's a lack of passion, and there's also a lack of transparency because there may be people pleasing or just outright avoidance. And so that's not good either. You always want to know what's going on between each other. So you're having a relationship based on truth and authenticity. So arguments are not bad. It is how you're arguing, how often you're arguing, and how long your arguments are. Okay, so if you're with me and you're like, hell yeah, I want some time back, let me know in the comments saying, hell yeah, I want my time back. So this is something that hits home for me because in the past, my arguments with past relationships and even earlier on in my marriage, they used to take hours. Yeah. I would say it would be around 2 to 3 hours for any given argument. And it was so emotionally draining, physically draining, mentally draining, you name it. And it was awful. I felt like it was just going around in circles and circles, and I would be crying, I would be angry, I would be sad, I would be frustrated, I would feel like, God, why can't you just get it already? And it just seemed like it would never end. And so it was after I did a lot of work on myself, did the conversation start to cut in half again, and in half again, and half again. And now my husband and I are able to navigate arguments so much faster, so much more painlessly. We're able to both show up as the adults that we all want to show up to our arguments, like, not like childish versions of ourselves, but more often the mature side, the respectful side, the compassionate partner, not the petty one, which I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's very easy to get into that role, right? The how dare you and the spiteful version of yourself, very, very normal. But again, we're not striving for normal here, right? We're striving for healthy in our relationship. So if you are in a position where your arguments feel like they're going in circles all of the time, it means that someone doesn't feel heard. Either you or your husband. And so when you don't feel heard, you're like, maybe if I say it a different way, maybe if I say it a different way, it'll work. Maybe they didn't understand. Let me break it down further. Let me know if you do this. Okay, I was guilty of doing this, and I ended up just making them feel like I thought they were stupid, which sometimes you kind of feel that way, right? You kind of feel like, how can you be so dumb? How do you not get it? So here is why your fights are taking long. You are not clear on what you want. It's so easy to know what you don't want, right? I don't want to feel disrespected. I don't want to feel like I'm doing all this by myself. I don't want to be overlooked. I don't want to be taken for granted of. But are you seeing how all of that has nothing to do with what you do want? It's so easy to come up with what you don't want, but it's so much harder to actually ask for what you do want. And when we're talking to someone about our happiness and wanting change, we have to know with clarity what we want. What do we want instead? Okay, sure, you don't want this. It's kind of like the food conversation, right? What's for dinner? What do you want to eat? Well, I don't want Mexican. I don't want Chinese. I don't want Japanese. Okay, what do you want, right? So this is the same situation. You can't go into it saying, I don't like this, I don't like that. You have to go into it saying what you do want so that you can focus the conversation instead of leaving it up to be a guessing game, right? I so was guilty of this. And what I didn't know was that when I do this and when you do this, you're essentially shifting the responsibility of your own happiness to whoever you're talking to. So in this case, your husband. You're saying, hey, husband, these are the things that I don't like. Here you go. Can you please tell me what it is that I need and go do it now, yesterday? But that's not fair because none of us are mind readers. And in the words of Brene Brown, I quote her so much, this particular phrase, actually, I quote a lot. To be unclear is unkind, and to be clear is to be kind. So if you want to base your relationship on kindness, you got to do the work. You got to stop, reflect, and think about what you want. So that's reason number one, why your fights may be lasting too long. Okay. And then the second reason is you're focused so much on feeling heard that you're not taking the time to actually hear him out. This is a two-person conversation, not a one person, not a I'm going to talk at you conversation and you just listen, right? But rather it's a dynamic conversation where it goes back and forth, back and forth. You say what you need, you say your experience, and he gets to share the same, and you guys get to clarify. So when emotions are heightened, it's very difficult to do this, but it is not impossible. It requires awareness, it requires intention, showing up, fully knowing what you need to get off of your chest in a respectful, compassionate way, but also being willing to hear him out for potential things that he may need or potential experiences that he may have and how he may have interpreted the situation differently than you experienced it. But when you focus too much on your experience, it doesn't leave room for that. And that is what makes the conversation drag on longer because you're essentially having two different conversations. You're talking about your experience, he's talking about his experience, but there is no bridge. And we need to build a bridge so that you guys can talk about your collective experience and how to move forward from where you're at. So the conversation doesn't just end at, well, this is my experience and this is true. And then he goes, well, this is my experience and this is true. Well, that's great. You might as well be talking to a brick wall because no progress is going to be made unless someone is willing to let down their drawbridge. I don't know why I'm using these castle analogies, but just Just go with it. Someone has to lower their bridge down, or someone has to step foot on the bridge and make their way towards the other person in order for progress to be made. You can't just be on two separate islands and be like, but I want to be together and I want to have a strong relationship, but I'm not willing to take a step forward towards you. I want you to go 90% and I'm going to go 10%. It doesn't work that way. You each have to go 100%. Okay. The third is putting too much weight on the words used versus what's underneath it all. Now, last time I checked, none of us are perfect at communicating. Some of us might be better than others, but none of us are by any measure perfect. We have emotions, and emotions get the best of us. And so we're not always going to be great about being articulate about what we mean and what we experience and how we feel. And so sometimes it's going to come off insulting, and it's going to trigger some defensiveness. And so if you're on the receiving end and you're like, oh, I cannot believe you just said that to me, you're now shifting the conversation to be about you when he's trying to share about his experience. Remember, you're in the role of listening and your desire to understand and be a compassionate partner. As soon as you make it about you, it's no longer that way anymore. Now, this is how it lengthens, right? Because he's going to continue talking and you're like so focused on what 3 words he said that didn't sit right with you. Okay. So this is very different, however, from needing to draw boundaries. Okay. Now what I'm talking about is maybe he said that, you know, well, I feel like I do a lot too. And then you make it about yourself as if he's discounting the work that you're doing at home, your contributions, right? But if there's some kind of verbal abuse going on, that is a different matter, okay? That is not to be tolerated. That's where your self-respect needs to kick in, and you need to implement your boundaries and maintain them, and then moving on from there, okay? That's a whole other conversation though. So it's important to try and understand, what is he actually trying to say that the words aren't communicating? So this is where playing detective can be really helpful. Like, I think he means this instead. Let me ask some questions to see if I'm on the right path to understanding him, right? Lastly, you may be getting distracted by your pride. So this is kind of connected to the last one that I just shared, right? Your pride, your ego may be saying, no, 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 let's protect ourselves. There's no way in hell we're going to let a man talk to us like that, let alone our husband, right? Making it about yourself again, rather than staying focused on resolving the conflict. Okay, so you can choose to stay stuck in, what did he just say to me? And instead of clarifying, hey, when you said this, this is how I received that message. Is that the message that you intended for me to hear? Clarifying, giving him an opportunity to get a preview of how you're interpreting the conversation so far, and letting him have that opportunity to be like, oh, oops, I did not mean it that way. I meant it this way. Or, oh, I can see how you took it that way. That is completely not how I intended it to come off. Let me try again, right? But it's important to focus back to resolving the conflict. If you ever feel like the conversation is starting to get sidetracked for whatever reason, bring it back. Bring it back to what you need it to go to. And so that you can both be heard and you can start to work on a solution that works for both of you, okay? So now ways that you can expedite the process of your argument is speaking factually. A lot of times we speak from our emotions and we bring up assumptions that we have as if it's truth. But if you speak from a factual position, like things that you saw, things that you personally said, things that he said without your interpretation, that's going to have the conversation move along more quickly, because it's when we insert our assumptions, which, by the way, comes from our baggage and past experiences, and us thinking we know how they're thinking, and us thinking that we know what their intentions are, that's where trouble starts, okay? Sharing your needs. Don't go into the conversation unless you know what you want out of it. What do you need? What are some options? What does success look like for you for this situation? Do the work beforehand. Don't go into there just knowing what you didn't like, all heated and ready to jump down his throat. And then when it comes down to it, he's like, well, what do you want from me? And you have nothing. You just wasted both of your time, okay? Refocus the conversation if it gets off track. This is when you can say, oh, time out, hold on. It seems like we're focusing on the wrong thing right now, or it seems like I am really in my head right now. Like if you're gonna own it, I'm really in my head right now because these words that you said are really stuck with me. And then you clarify and do whatever you need to get back on track, right? So let's say you want more support around the house, and now all of a sudden you find yourself talking about, I don't even know, plans, right? Plans that didn't go the way you expected it to. Get back on track, okay? Leave that to another conversation or table it. Give grace, that's another one. Like I said, we're all emotional beings. We're all human. We make mistakes. We slip up. I'm sure you've said some things where you're like, oh, that didn't sound good. He can do the same. So give grace where you can. What, at the end of the day, is most important is for you guys to come back together to create a solution that works for the both of you. Not for you to end up at, opposite ends of the issue and not be able to find your way back together to be partners and to connect again and to get back to that happy place. Okay, so give grace where you can. We're all moody sometimes, right? Maybe he's having a bad day. Maybe you can ask him, are you doing okay? How can I support you right now? How are you really? I think it goes too long where we ask our partners, how are you right now? Like really, not just the, oh, I'm doing fine answer, but how's work going for you? How's being a dad going for you? How's our marriage going for you? Like every 3 months, I always ask my husband, how's your experience of this marriage for you right now? Is there anywhere I can support you so that it could be better? Is there anything that you've been unable to share with me because of time, because you haven't had the ability to find the right words to share with me? Like this is like his forum to speak up and share, where I just sit and listen, no matter how difficult it is. I would rather have the truth than to be blindsided later on and then things just explode, right? Next is know your worth. Know your worth, right? And what I mean by that is anchor into your confidence of knowing I am someone who is kind and loving and compassionate, and I am an amazing partner. I'm an amazing person. I deserve to be loved no matter what. And I am confident in that truth. Okay, so know your worth. And when you do that, when you go into the conversation knowing your worth, you're not as easily offended. That's when you can offer more grace and more compassion, because while you know your worth, you also know that you too are flawed And when I say you too, I mean you also. You also are flawed, just like he is. And so you can then look beyond the words that are being used and say, I wonder if he's having a bad day. Or I wonder how long this has been on his mind. And that's why it's coming out like this, why it's coming out so strongly or so brash. Okay. And then the last thing, boundaries. If your conversation is lasting too long and it's getting a little messy, maybe it's time for a timeout. Maybe it's time to talk about what the rules of engagement are. And what I mean by that is, what are some rules that you have about engaging in a conversation with each other? Like no name calling, no bringing up the past. Like these are just examples, not necessarily ones I say that you should use as your rules, but rather come up with your own rules to help you stay safe and stay open to continue having a conversation with him that could be productive. All right. So come up with those rules. And if any of those boundaries are being crossed, you can offer yourself choices. Either call a timeout and say, okay, these rules are being infringed on. Do we need to take a break and revisit this? Or that could be like a reset, like, oh, we're doing these things. Let's reset right now, recalibrate, so that you could bring awareness to how you're each showing up. Or, like I said earlier, call a timeout and say, okay, I think we're both really, really upset right now, and we're not able to show up to the conversation as the respectful, compassionate partners that we want to be. And until we can both come back and be those things and follow these rules, we should not continue this conversation. And then revisit it later. Okay? Bye.